All right, guys, it's been a minute, but I am back today with my biggest Dynasty sells. I covered the buys last week. I'll put a link to that in the description if you didn't see it. But today is all about players that I am lower on than the consensus, players that I would be trading away. So I'm excited to get into that. My name is Paul. This is Pure Potential. If you enjoyed today's video, make sure to subscribe to the channel, leave a like, leave a comment. Let's go. All right, so today I am using rankings from FantasyCalc.com as my proxy for Dynasty market value. No source is going to be perfect. No source is going to perfectly match every single league, every group of 12 managers out there that has a Dynasty league, but it is based on actual Dynasty trades, and I think it's more accurate for your average established league than a keep, trade, cut, or startup ADP. So that's what I'm using. Just a quick note, I will be showing and talking about the FantasyCalc ranking for each of these players today, but just know that I have manually adjusted their overall ranking to remove the rookie picks, because FantasyCalc has the rookies and the rookie picks in the pool of players that are ranked. And so all of these players are kind of artificially being pushed further down in the overall because Ashton Genty and the 101 are both in there. So I'm just removing those so it's not redundant. And so when I'm comparing it to how I have them ranked, it's more accurate. Now I'm going to be doing these cells in order of most valuable to least valuable. So I'm coming in hot here to start. My first sell of the day is going to be Saquon Barkley, who is currently ranked as the 20th overall player on FantasyCalc, the RB4, compared to my ranking of 33rd overall, RB6. Now, Saquon Barkley, he is one of my absolute favorite players in the league. He plays for my favorite team. He's incredibly good at the game. He's going to be on the Madden cover, which actually works against him, I guess, if you go by history. That is not what my argument is based on. We're not doing the Madden curse here, but we know the deal with Saquon Barkley. He's coming off an RB1 overall season. He scored over 22 points per game, rushed for over 2,000 yards, arguably the best running back in the league last year. He's also 28 years old. That matters at running back. People don't want to hear it, especially at this time of year. Everybody is healthy. Everybody is perfect and never going to get hurt again. You know, you can ask the people who drafted Christian McCaffrey in basically this same exact spot last offseason how they feel about that decision now. But part of why I think Barkley is a sell is just I don't think he's likely to repeat the level of fantasy success that he saw last year. And there's a few different factors that go into that. It's not that I'm predicting he's going to fall off in talent in 2025. It's not that I'm predicting that he's going to get hurt. Both of those things are very possible, and I think they should be factored in for a player of his age because that downside risk, that value downside can come quickly. But let's just look at the situation for him. First of all, we have Kellen Moore leaving Philadelphia. I think that's relevant because Kellen Moore offenses have always been very high in overall play volume. The Eagles ranked 4th in plays per game last year with 65. And if you look at the past 5 years when Kellen Moore was the OC in Los Angeles and then in Dallas, he ranked 7th, 8th, 2nd, and 7th in plays per game. So that's one factor. Now, it's not a massive factor because really you're only talking about a 5 or 6 play per game spread between the vast majority of teams in the league. But if we see a little dip in overall play volume for the Eagles, that could cost Barkley a couple of carries. And he is a running back that is extremely reliant on raw volume in the context of the Eagles offense because he's just not going to get targeted a lot. So he needs to get a lot of carries on the ground. And the more carries he gets on the ground, the more likely he is to break off one of those big plays that really carried him last year. And then I think the game scripts matter too. The Eagles were just blowing people out of the water last year. They won something like 15 consecutive games to end the season. And as a result, they had the lowest pass rate in the NFL at 48%. Now, when you have Saquon Barkley and you have an offensive line like the Eagles have, you're going to have a very low pass rate. But when you split up the Eagles pass rate in a few different ways, you can see how these winning game scripts were really impacting things. Because in the first half, they were actually only 29th in pass rate at 56%. That's significantly higher than their overall. But in the second half, they were not only dead last, but they were 7% lower than the next closest team in second half pass rate at 39.6%. They just did not have to throw the ball in the second half of games because they were always leading and usually leading by a good margin. Their neutral script pass rate, which accounts for neutral situations when the game is close, was 52%. So you look at their schedule this year, right? They have the 4th hardest 2025 schedule based on Vegas win totals, according to Sharp Football Analysis. So I think the Eagles, just by sheer probability, the harder schedule, I think they're just likely to be in a lot more close games. And that's going to affect Barkley on the margins. That's going to lead to fewer attempts. Now, maybe he gets a few more targets if the team has to go more pass heavy. He just hasn't been a big receiving threat since his rookie season. The Eagles, and especially Jalen Hurts, have never had that proclivity to check down to the running back very often. I think any uptick in passing is going to primarily benefit A.J. Brown and Devonta Smith. Again, it's not to say that I'm projecting Barkley to massively fall off. It's just that his RB1 overall season last year was one of the lower end RB1 seasons that we've seen over the past decade. It wasn't like a prime Christian McCaffrey type of season in terms of the impact of it. I think you should expect some regression off of that. And when you pair that up with his age, which leads to this steady depreciation with some big downside risk if there's injury, if there's decline in play, I think that he is overpriced where he's going. I would sell him for basically any player that's ranked near him on FantasyCalc. That's Caleb Williams, Trey McBride if it's tight end premium, Drake London, Nico Collins, Drake May, Justin Herbert. All of these players are ranked near him. Most of them are below him. But I also do have Amari and Hampton ranked ahead of him in Dynasty. I would trade Barkley for Hampton straight up. You might even be able to get a plus in a lot of leagues. I would also be willing to trade down for Devon Achane or Bucky Irving. And I think in that case, you could get a second on top, possibly even a little bit more. And I think all of those are really viable moves for Saquon Barkley. And we're not going too far down the ranks to find our next sell, which is CJ Stroud. He sits at 22nd overall in the FantasyCalc ranks, which are obviously super flex. That makes him the QB 8. Now, my rank isn't dramatically different. I have him at 29th overall currently, my QB 11, but I do think that those 7 spots are meaningful when you're talking about this area of the board. Like if you've ever tried to trade up from the mid 3rd to the late 2nd of a dynasty startup, you know that that is not a totally negligible opportunity cost. People are going to ask for a lot to get into that tier. Now, interestingly, my original sell was actually going to be Bo Nix. And I do think his value is also a tiny bit inflated relative to other quarterbacks that I view somewhat similarly, like Jordan Love, Trevor Lawrence, Kyler Murray, even JJ McCarthy. But CJ Stroud is valued even higher than Bo Nix on FantasyCalc by about 5 spots. And I actually had him ranked about that high until I started researching for this video. And then I couldn't really figure out why, other than just sort of falling into a bit of the dynasty groupthink on CJ Stroud. I couldn't figure out why he deserved to be ranked so much higher than these other pocket quarterbacks. So let's just review the facts really quickly on Stroud. In 15 games as a rookie, threw the ball 499 times for 4,100 yards, 26 total touchdowns, 8.2 yards per attempt, 5 interceptions. He scored 18.7 points per game. Extremely impressive season, especially for a rookie. That shoots his value way, way up. He becomes a top 5 pick in dynasty startups. Unfortunately, came back down to earth in a big way. In year 2, he played 17 games, 532 attempts, 3,700 yards, 7 yards per attempt, only 20 total touchdowns, 13.7 points per game. That makes him the 28th best fantasy quarterback last year. Extremely disappointing. Like there's, people talk about a sophomore slump. That's a pretty extreme sophomore slump. He did not build on the promise he showed as a rookie whatsoever. Maybe he redeemed himself a little bit by winning that playoff game against the Chargers, but overall, just not a good year for him. Now, is there reason for optimism in year 3? Absolutely there is. They added Jaden Higgins and Jalen Noel in the draft. They traded for Christian Kirk. They dealt with injuries last year to Tank Dell, Stephon Diggs, and Nico Collins throughout the year. Adding that depth in the passing game absolutely is going to help. They also fired Bobby Slowick, who I do think was running a pretty terrible offensive system, and they hired Nick Caley, who was the Rams passing game coordinator. Now, he's an unknown. I think it's a step in the right direction. It's never a bad idea to hire somebody from the McVay tree, but we don't know for sure what this guy is. And I don't think that there's enough working in Stroud's favor to really justify his dynasty value right now. His offensive line is still awful. It was awful last year. They traded Laramie Tunsil. I don't think that they really did enough to shore that position group up. Rookie pass catchers are great, but they're still rookies. They need to prove that they're good. Again, Nick Caley is an unknown as well. And CJ Stroud himself just doesn't run. He doesn't add much on the ground. He's like a Patrick Mahomes level rushing quarterback at best, where he's going to scramble sometimes, but he's not boosting his floor in a significant way. So he needs to be a really high-end passer. That means he needs high volume and high efficiency to really hit a high ceiling. And if we look around at any type of gauge of his 2025 season, what people are expecting, nothing is showing that he's going to take that next step, that he's going to be a big breakout in 2025. His ADP over on underdog.com shows us that the market's not expecting that much. He's the QB 18 there. His ADP is behind Jordan Love, Drake May, Herbert, Prescott, Goff, Purdy, Caleb, Nix, Kyler. And if you go to the fantasypoints.com projections, he's grouped with all these players as well, and he's behind many of them. So I just can't think of any reason why CJ Stroud should be valued in Dynasty so far ahead of this other group of quarterbacks. I would be looking to trade him happily for Trevor Lawrence, Jordan Love, Kyler Murray, JJ McCarthy, Brock Purdy, even Cam Ward with a plus on top. And you can get a plus. Like, the market is telling you that CJ Stroud, he is a cut above the rest. We value him ahead of the rest. So in most leagues, I think you're able to get, early second value, maybe even a first in some cases, to tier down to one of these other quarterbacks that by all accounts is set up for maybe even more success than him. You look at somebody like a Trevor Lawrence, his situation right now just seems way better with Liam Cohn, with Brian Thomas, with Travis Hunter. You look at guys like Brock Purdy, maybe he's not exciting. I think he has a better situation around him. I think he's a similar archetype of quarterback as far as how he's going to put up fantasy production. So that's something I'd be doing. I'd also just trade him straight up for Drake May, Caleb Williams, or Justin Herbert. He's right in that mix on FantasyCalc. So if his value is in the ballpark of those guys, I'm happy to pivot one for one. I think May and Caleb are both guys that are going to run more than Stroud. They have that year 2 upside where they could really take a leap in 2025. I think they have a much more compelling case for that top 24 ranking. And then Justin Herbert, he's the same type of quarterback as Stroud as far as how he's going to accumulate points. The difference is we have 5 years of high level play from Herbert where we can feel much more confident in his talent level and in his fantasy floor. So those are 2 good options, I think. The last thing you could try to do with Stroud is just kind of shoot for the moon. You've already got a very highly valued asset here in Superflex. Why not go to the Lamar or Allen or Burrow or even Jefferson or Chase managers and see what you would have to add to Stroud to get a deal done? Like, use him as a stepping stone to get you into a truly elite difference-making type of asset. All right, next up, we've got Sam LaPorta, who, if you factor in that FantasyCalc is not a tight end premium site, might be the most mispriced player on this list. He is 45th overall, the tight end 3 in their rankings. In my rankings, which are tight end premium, he's 56th overall and the tight end 4. So he's 11 spots lower in my rankings, even though I'm accounting for tight end premium and FantasyCalc is not. Now, if you go over to Keep Trade Cut, where they do have a tight end premium toggle, LaPorta is actually the 34th overall player over there, which is even worse. But anyway, let's talk about LaPorta as a player. Obviously had a huge rookie year, came onto the scene almost 900 yards, 10 touchdowns, one of the more impressive rookie tight end seasons that we have seen. Really came back down to earth in year 2. He's very similar, honestly, path to CJ Stroud. Big rise, goes to the top of his position, kind of comes back down, but there does feel like there's a bit of anchoring to what he did as a rookie that is impacting his value. Now, my issue, as you can see, I only have him 1 tight end spot below the market. My issue with him is really not within the tight end position, at least not his order in that ranking. Like, I have Colston Loveland ahead of LaPorta. I don't care if you prefer him to Loveland. I have them very close. My biggest issue is the opportunity cost at other positions. Again, we're talking about non-tight end premium here, and he is ranked ahead of Breece Hall, Travion Henderson, JJ McCarthy, Bucky Irving, Trevor Lawrence, Rashee Rice. This is completely indefensible value. If LaPorta is being valued anywhere close to this in your leagues, you simply cannot roster him. Like, it's just, there's no reason for it. In a non-tight end premium format, Sam LaPorta scored 10.9 points per game last year. That's less than Quentin Johnston, less than Darnell Mooney, less than Khalil Shakir. Even in tight end premium, where he was the tight end 6 at 12.8, he was way behind the top 5 guys, and he was much closer to players like Dallas Goedert, Zach Ertz, Pat Freiermuth than he was to those elite players. And he was still getting outscored by players like DK Metcalf, Adam Thielen, Josh Downs, Jamison Williams. There is some truth to the idea of a positional advantage at tight end, where most of them don't score a lot of points, some of them do, and you can have an advantage by having those guys. It's typically overstated, I'd say, rather than understated by the market, but it's definitely not a real positional advantage when your tight end is scoring in the same ballpark as guys that you can get for a 4th-round rookie pick. Like, if you're not going to distance yourself from Hunter Henry or Zach Ertz or whoever, you do not have a positional advantage. So I think the price here is way too high. Now, I'm not going to sit here and tell you that 2024 was the ceiling outcome for Sam LaPorta. We know that's not true. We saw him do more than that as a rookie. But I think it is important to note that 2024 was the emergence of Jameson Williams. That really muddies the situation, because when a tight end is not a top 2 target on their team, it is extremely difficult to hit a high ceiling. It basically never happened. I think Andrew Cooper from Fantasy Alarm was one of the first people to really hammer this point home, but you need to be a top 2 target on your team as a tight end to really put up the type of production that we should care about in fantasy. Now, LaPorta is still on a good offense. He's still very talented, and he still has two-way contingent upside. If we see St. Brown or Williams get hurt in the season, he can put up top 3 type tight end production over a stretch. But he still is just too expensive. So what I suggest in a non-tight end premium format, I would cash out for literally any 1st-round pick. I don't care. Give me a 1st-round pick. He's not scoring enough points to be worth that. And then I'm just reinvesting in a cheaper tight end. I'm reinvesting in Jonnu Smith or Evan Ingram or whoever. I don't care. In tight end premium, maybe you want to stay within the tight end position. I've got him much closer to TJ Hawkinson, George Kittle, Tyler Warren, obviously Colston Loveland, who I have ranked ahead of him, than the market does. So I would say try to tier down to one of those guys, see what you can get on top. Can you get a 2nd and a 3rd? Can you get an early 2nd on top of LaPorta to go down to one of those players? I think that's a totally fine thing to do. And then if you're looking across positions, somebody like T. Higgins, Chris Olave, Emeka Egbuka, Roma Dunze, Christian McCaffrey, Quinshon Judkins, Kenneth Walker. I think these are all players that just have a better combination of floor and ceiling that I would rather invest in than LaPorta right now. And next, let's go to Jonathan Taylor, 44th overall player on FantasyCalc, the RB9. In my rankings, the 55th overall player, RB11. Jonathan Taylor is 26.3 years old, which is certainly not ancient at the running back position, but it is an age at which we basically never see running backs gain value again. They steadily depreciate in value every single season until they eventually crumble into dust. We have very rare exceptions, like Saquon Barkley going from the Giants to the Eagles. He did plenty this year to gain value as an older running back. But by and large, the vast majority of cases, Jonathan Taylor is at his value ceiling right now. He will never be worth more than he is right now. And it's important to note that the end can come very quickly for running backs, even talented running backs, when we don't expect it. We saw Nick Chubb tear his ACL and MCL at age 27 after being the RB6 the year prior, lost basically all of his value. He is on waivers in a lot of leagues now. Austin Eckler went from being the RB1 overall in 2022, putting up more points than we've seen from Jonathan Taylor, like at any point. And he finished as the RB21 the next season, and then basically fell completely off the map. Travis Etienne had an RB7 points per game finish in 2023. Same finish we just saw from Jonathan Taylor. He actually had a very brief stint as the overall RB1 in Dynasty that year. Where is Travis Etienne now? Not the RB1, that's for sure. And we look at Ezekiel Elliott. Guy had the draft capital, he had the pedigree, he was cranking out RB1 season after RB1 season, falls completely off a cliff at age 25, never puts up over 15 points per game again. We do not know what is going to happen with running backs. I don't care how talented you think Jonathan Taylor is. I don't think that he deserves this ranking at his age, because he does not possess the ceiling of a Saquon Barkley or specifically a Christian McCaffrey type of running back. He has cracked 18 points per game just once in his 5 seasons. He did it in his 2nd year. And when you look at his current situation, this Colts offense with Anthony Richardson and Daniel Jones at the helm is hardly set up to be an elite touchdown scoring offense. Like, he's probably not in a top 10 scoring offense. And it's important to note that touchdowns are a huge part of his ceiling case. Now, I know he scored 12 last year. That was still only enough to get him to 17.6 points per game. And that type of production is certainly not guaranteed. It's not what we've seen from him most years in his career. So he's a largely touchdown dependent running back who is not in an offense that we project to be amongst the leaders in touchdowns scored this year. He's missed 16 games over the last 3 seasons. He does not catch passes. He has less than 20 receptions each of the last 2 years. I just don't understand. I think that sometimes the perceived talent of a player, and don't get me wrong, he's a very talented player, but that perceived talent can cloud the reality of fantasy output. Like, he's not been putting up Derrick Henry type of numbers. Derrick Henry gets away with not being a pass catcher by being on a total other planet as far as his rushing production, his touchdown production. That is not what we've gotten from Taylor. I think that he is being overvalued due to kind of his brand equity and the season that he had back in 2021. You look at Taylor versus other running backs that are significantly further down the rankings, it's just not that different. You can look at Josh Jacobs, James Cook, Chuba Hubbard, Chase Brown. How they got there is a little bit different as far as rushing yards versus receptions versus touchdowns. But you're talking about a 1.5 point spread in points per game total between these 5 running backs. And the market perception of these guys is very, very different. So if I have Jonathan Taylor at this value, if my league values him like this FantasyCalc ranking, I am looking to sell him for one of these other backs, Jacobs, Cook, Hubbard, Brown, and I'm just trying to get a plus on top. Give me a second on top, maybe a little bit more if I can get it. But rather than banking on Jonathan Taylor having this perceived longevity due to his talent, I'd rather trade for a running back that projects similarly in 2025 and then store that extra value, that little bonus value that I'm getting with Taylor. I'd rather just store that in picks where I know that that value is not just going to disappear in the blink of an eye. I actually have it in a tangible form. Outside of those players, I prefer Bucky Irving straight up to Jonathan Taylor quite easily. That looks like a trade that's doable. I would do that. And even as much as I bashed on Quinshon Judkins in my players to avoid video, I'd rather have Judkins because they profile as similar running backs in terms of how they score points. But Judkins is on a rookie contract and he is like 4 years younger. So give me Quinshon Judkins over Jonathan Taylor as well. Next, I'm going to jump a little further down the rankings, get to our first wide receiver of the day, which is DK Metcalf. 73rd overall player on FantasyCalc, wide receiver 24. I've got him ranked 85th overall, so about a round later, and wide receiver 32. So about 8 wide receiver spots behind where he is on FantasyCalc. Now we think about the new situation for Metcalf in Pittsburgh. Aaron Rodgers, I think, is still the most likely Steelers quarterback for this season. I do not believe they're going to go with Mason Rudolph or Will Howard as the starter, though if they do, DK would be even more mispriced. I think they're going to go with Rodgers. Metcalf himself is 27.5, and he has finished between the wide receiver 20 and wide receiver 30 in points per game each of the past 4 seasons. So he had his big second year in the league, wide receiver 10 in 2020. Since then, he has scored 14.4 points per game, 13.5, 14.1, and 12.9 this most recent season. Not very inspiring stuff. It feels like every year Metcalf gets drafted and redraft as if he's going to do what he did in his big breakout season, and he never does it or really comes close to doing it. In fact, over the last 3 years, Jacoby Myers has actually just slightly outscored DK Metcalf in points per game. So, for his part, he has not been very impressive. He has not been the guy that I think he's been branded to be. And when you look at the Steelers, they ranked 29th in pass attempts per game last year. Now, what did they do this offseason? They swapped out Najee Harris for Caleb Johnson. They swapped out George Pickens for DK Metcalf. The personnel is very similar. They kept Arthur Smith. Aaron Rodgers probably brings them a little bit closer to league average, but it's still going to be less than DK was seeing in Seattle. It's not going to be some high-flying passing game. The plan of the Steelers is very clear. They are going to play slow. They are going to try to run the ball well. They're going to play good defense. They're going to run out the clock on teams. They're not trying to light up the scoreboard. Interesting tweet here from Nate Tice. Only 7 NFL offenses have snapped the ball on average with 8 seconds or fewer on the play clock since 2019. 5 of those offenses had Aaron Rodgers under center. So we're not going to see a lot of play volume. Again, we're not going to see a lot of pass attempts. And you might be thinking with DK, okay, all that's fine and good, but who else is going to catch the ball? And no doubt, the rest of the Steelers depth chart is uninspiring. It's Calvin Austin, Roman Wilson, Robert Woods. It's super duper gross. But the only season we've ever really seen DK command a high target share was 2021, when he had a 27% target share in the Seahawks offense. It was him and Tyler Lockett and basically nobody else. And that's great. He had a high target share that year. It is worth noting, though, that the Seahawks were 32nd in pass attempts that season, very, very low volume. And studies have shown that the lower the passing volume, the easier it is for the top weapons to consolidate a lot of that target share. So I think best case in Pittsburgh is either they're dead last in pass attempts, and then maybe Metcalf can carve out like a 27, maybe a 28% target share, more likely they're probably somewhere around like 20 to 25th in attempts, with DK consolidating like 25 to 26% of those targets based on his track record in the NFL. I don't think that in his 6th season, am I right there? 7th season, he is going to break out and become a target earner on a level that we haven't seen before. So fantasy-wise, what are we really hoping for with Metcalf? That he gives us some kind of 1,000-yard, 10-touchdown season where he scores 14 to 15 points per game? Because I just don't see a clear path to him doing much more than that. And he's at an age where he's never gaining dynasty value again. Like, he's going to turn 28 during the season. From that point, it's just kind of steady depreciation. And so from that angle, like, he's not a value play. So he's purely a production play. And again, what is the ceiling in this environment? What is he giving you that you can't get from a wide receiver that's much cheaper? Like, why can't you just go buy Calvin Ridley for half the price and get mostly the same player? I don't see much of an appeal there with Metcalf. I would sell him for any future first, which is kind of borderline of whether you can get that right now, but I would do that for sure. I would sell him for an early second in this year's class, or I would look at some of the wide receivers ranked around him. Zay Flowers, Chris Olave, Jordan Addison, Matthew Golden, Luther Burden, Jalen Waddle, George Pickens. All of those players are more appealing to me personally than DK Metcalf. And then let's go to DJ Moore, who's ranked very closely to Metcalf, 78th overall, wide receiver 27 in FantasyCalc rankings. I have him 87th and wide receiver 35. He's 28 years old, so just a little bit older than Metcalf. And honestly, his career production doesn't look all that different to DK's, except that his one peak season came more recently. So in 2023, DJ Moore finished as the wide receiver 9. And other than that, he's finished between wide receiver 23 and wide receiver 33 every other season from 2020 to 2024. So what was special about that 2023 season? Well, let's start with the other target earners, in quotes, on the 2023 Chicago Bears. We're looking at Darnell Mooney, who actually missed a couple of games, Cole Kmet, and after that, nothing. Roshan Johnson, Tyler Scott, Robert Tonyan, Chase Claypool, very, very poor offensive supporting cast. So yes, DJ Moore was able to funnel a high percentage of the targets to himself in that season. He was also running extremely hot on big plays. His expected fantasy points were a good bit lower than his actual fantasy points scored. And interesting note, if you look at his PFF receiving grades throughout his career, that 2023 season sticks out as a major outlier. I don't know what kind of coaching he was getting. I don't know what he was doing that year, his workout routine or what, but he was playing at a level that we have not seen from him before or since. So that's something to get out of the way with DJ Moore, because I think that season is really looming large in people's minds when they think about his expectations moving forward. The other thing I hear about DJ Moore is, what about the Amon-Ra St. Brown role? Isn't he going to be Ben Johnson's Amon-Ra St. Brown? Well, first of all, DJ Moore hasn't played more than 27% of his snaps in the slot since his rookie season. He is not a slot wide receiver. Now, it's unlikely that the Bears have any one wide receiver talented enough to even play the Amon-Ra St. Brown role in Johnson's offense. But if anybody is going to be getting those easy button touches from the slot, I think it's more likely to be this year's second round pick, Luther Burden, doing that than it is DJ Moore. At the very least, I think Burden is going to factor in enough to that type of schemed work, because he's such a good yak threat, that it's going to cap more ceiling in that regard. If you look at the Bears personnel, which is much, much stronger, again, than the year that DJ Moore broke out in 2023, the most logical base personnel for this team is to have Rome at X, DJ Moore playing Z, flanker, with Luther Burden in the slot and Loveland at tight end. And then you're also going to have Cole Kmet factoring in somewhat in these two tight end sets. That's going to take either Burden or Moore off the field at times. Probably more Burden early in the season, but who knows by the end of the year. All of this combined, I think similar to DK, we're looking at a 28-year-old wide receiver with a pretty capped fantasy ceiling, not likely to crack, 15 and a half, 16 points per game, anything that's really moving the needle for you in fantasy. And all the while you're holding on to a guy that has depreciation risk, injury risk. You're not getting a lot for it at his cost. And my sell price, because he's so close to Metcalf, is pretty much the same idea. I'm looking for a future first or an early second, or I'm looking at these other younger wide receivers that frankly could outscore him as soon as this season in Flowers, Olave, Addison, Golden, Burden, Waddle, or Pickens. All those guys make more sense to me as dynasty assets that I want to hold than DJ Moore right now. Anyway, that's going to do it for today, guys. I had a couple more names I could have touched on, but video is getting kind of long, so we're going to call it there. As always, thank you so much for watching. Thank you for supporting the channel. If you enjoy my Dynasty content, make sure to subscribe. Really goes a long way. And if you want even more Dynasty content from me, consider becoming a YouTube member by hitting the join button or the link under this video in the description. You can get access to my Dynasty rankings, to weekly live streams, and private channels in the Pure Potential Discord. Either way, I'll be back soon with another Dynasty video, and I hope I'll see you then.